Hello everybody, my name is Big Citrus and let's get into it. The first ever Five Nights at Freddy's game released on August 8th of 2014, and I genuinely believe that the world was never the same after that. The game had a unique concept in you playing as a security guard trying to monitor the wild and possessed animatronics of a once famous but now torn down and abandoned pizzeria. It was very simplistic visually and gameplay wise, and I know for a fact that the man behind the game never knew just how much it was going to change his life and the world. When you think about it, Five Nights at Freddy's is probably one of the most homegrown franchises in the entire world. It started with one singular game that would eventually spawn dozens sequels and spin-offs that would come out very rapidly, one after another, I might add. And while the games themselves never really changed much outside of the lore and the story, the community and the reputation behind this franchise has changed entirely. It started as just some, indie horror game that was really only popular with people who were on the internet religiously. And of course, nowadays, everyone is on the internet religiously, so it's no surprise to see that Five Nights at Freddy's has become legitimately the biggest horror franchise in the world. This all started with a game that was made on the budget of a ham sandwich and could be played with literally 2 fingers. And the games that followed the original would really not change the formula. While the gameplay would become more dynamic, it still remained the same of trying to survive Five Nights at Freddy's while being a glorified camera operator, or under-glorified, I guess. There are a lot of reasons as to why this series became such a phenomenon as it did, and today we're gonna look at them all. Check out all my stuff in the description if you'd be inclined, and let's get into it. I know that this will not be the first video talking about the insane phenomenon of the FNAF world and the FNAF franchise and the FNAF fanbase, and it certainly won't be the last. One thing that I want to do specifically in this video is just really highlight how fucking bizarre this all is. But before we talk about this invention, let's talk about the inventor. Scott Braden Cawthon was just about 35 years old when he made the game that would change the face of horror and the video gaming industry forever. As some people know for a variety of reasons, Scott Cawthon is a very religious man. Before FNAF, he was mainly making religious-based, 2D games. All you really need to know is that none of these games really took off. After having a lot of his religious-inspired games not really take off, he knew he needed to figure out some other way to make money while chasing his dreams of being an independent game developer. He released a game called Chipper and Sons Lumber Company. Yeah, I wonder why this one didn't take off, Scott. Which one of the main characters himself, I think this is Chipper, or maybe this is Sons, had a design that creeped a lot of players out and was genuinely unappealing to anyone who saw the game, and a lot of people described it as a scary animatronic looking sort of creature. Scott Cawthon himself, after being kicked down time and time again, saw this criticism, and while he wasn't really happy about it, it did give him an idea. I imagine this criticism made him realize that animatronics are kind of freaky as fuck. I always wanted to go to Chuck E. Cheese's as a kid, and legitimately, I'm not making any of this up, by the way. I did grow up in a pretty poor family, but even Chuck E. Cheese's, going once a year wouldn't have been the end-all be-all of my family's financial situation. No, the main reason that my parents didn't want to take me is because they were legitimately, both of them, creeped out by the animatronics. I remember one of them showing me a video of how they moved on YouTube, and I was like, well, yeah, that's scary, but I'm not really terrified of it or anything. I'd still like to go. I never got to go to Chuck E. Cheese's, by the way. I've still never been, so, if anyone in the comments wants to go to Chuck E. Cheese's with me sometime, hit me up, But I think most people in the world have some sort of general uncanny fear of animatronics. Scott, of course, would develop this into the idea Five Nights at Freddy's. As I mentioned before, very simplistic video game in which you play as a security guard working at a family diner pizzeria chain called Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. It takes place in the 80s or the 90s or the 70s. Look, if I have to look up every single fine detail of the FNAF lore to be 100% accurate for this video would take me 5 years to make. I'll try my best though. For those who don't know somehow and you're watching this video, the main gameplay mechanics revolve around you having to keep the animatronics from breaking into your office because for some reason they identify you as not a person, but instead as a out-of-costume exoskeleton that needs to be put back into its suit. So you have to take watch of the pizzeria and of course fend them off from coming into your office and, jelking you. You can use the cameras to see which animatronics are coming and when. You can use the lights to see if they're at the end of the hallway outside inside of your office, and of course, you can use the doors to stop them from breaking in. That's literally it. You have to make it from midnight to 6 in the morning, and every night that you complete increases the difficulty of the following night. You don't really understand what's going on, and your real only excerpts about anything important are coming from this man inside of this phone. He's really your only source of information about what's going on with the restaurant, the animatronics, and just how to try and survive the best. After you complete all 5 nights, you are fired from the restaurant. Yes, fired. And that's basically it. This game came out at, in my opinion, the perfect time. I genuinely mean it. I cannot think of a more perfect time for this to have come out instead of in the year 2013 or 2014. Because at this time, weird little indie games by people or companies that no one had ever heard of were blowing up on the internet. Games that weren't even programmed or developed well at all, which you could easily argue that the first Five Nights at Freddy's is that way. It's not a very fundamentally complicated game. As long as they had an interesting concept and feel, and of course, scare, people who were rising in the YouTube scene and just looking to do a let's play and have a face cam reaction where they literally scream like a little girl and, you know, fill their pants up with shit and fly across the room. We're just looking to play these games, record themselves playing them, joke around, and have fun. It was very easy content for these YouTubers to make, as they could basically just, you know, find a new game every week and then pump out video after video on them for as long as people are interested in it, really. Just about every popular let's player played this game when it first dropped. There might be some people who throughout this video say that I am focusing way too much on people who don't even make the video game having an influence on how popular FNAF became. And if you know anything about the internet, you would know that anyone who's going to disagree with me is just completely wrong. Content creators and diehard fans basically make 90% of all popular franchises you see nowadays online into the juggernauts that they are. Five Nights at Freddy's, it has become a worldwide phenomenon, and a lot of that is 100% due to just normal fans who loved it. I'm not gonna say things were always very smooth in the Five Nights at Freddy's fan base or the FNAF fans, especially with the content creators who would play the games, but at the start, the Let's Players and all the people streaming and uploading videos playing this game had a huge influence on these games becoming insanely popular. I didn't even know these games existed until some YouTubers uploaded a video on them, and I know I'm not the only one. After the first underground success of the first Five Nights at Freddy's game, Scott Cawthon immediately began working on a sequel called, you're never gonna believe this, right? Five Nights at Freddy's 2. I've seen a fair amount of people in the FNAF community who have always dissed this game, but I don't know, I liked it when it came out. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is the Five Nights at Freddy's game that I've definitely played the most, just because I didn't really have a lot of other games I could afford at the time, and this was very cheap. This Five Nights at Freddy's game is probably most notable for introducing a whole plethora of now iconic characters, which I feel like that's something we need to talk about. I mentioned before that a game just having an interesting, you know, unique, creative concept can really take it to the next level. I honestly think that in combination with a lot of diehard fans who were obsessed with the lore of the Five Nights at Freddy's universe is the #1 reason that this game became as popular as it is today. The concept of haunted animatronics trying to murder you is very simple and easy to get behind. But we all know there's so much more to the FNAF lore than that, right? Don't worry, I'll get there later. Scott Cawthon was able to come up with such a batshit insane story that basically anyone could have their own theory about. I'm gonna hope there's at least one person out there who gets the comparison I'm about to make, but the Five Nights at Freddy's storyline honestly reminds me the most of the Call of Duty Zombies storyline. Even to this day, there's still not really definitive answers about what events happen in what chronological order and who's responsible for what, and if there's multiple timelines or not. So many questions. The COD Zombie storyline was always driven by fan interaction. Treyarch, the developers behind the main Call of Duty Zombies mode, were always trying to one-up and make a new surprise with each story, which is very similar to how Scott Cawthon designed the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. Each new release and chapter in the story would kind of just be trying something new and trying to one-up the batshit bullshit insanity of the previous chapter. Fans would make their own theories and everything, and the developers would respond to them accordingly by either trying to completely disprove theories that the fans have made or lean heavily into them. The only real way that you can understand either of these games' stories is by watching some sort of overly long, overly complicated, overly explained video on YouTube. I mean, yeah, there's little bits and pieces that you can piece together through some Easter eggs in all of the games, but you're never really going to be getting the full story. People were so involved in trying to solve the mysteries of these universes, and it was always a hot topic discussion for fans. I think Scott was aware of this, and this is one of the reasons that every single time there was a new Five Nights at Freddy's game, he would introduce some new characters with their entirely own new lore. Which is why in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, homie just went crazy. He introduced the toy version of the animatronic characters, which to me personally kind of just seemed like Scott was trying to experiment with how much merchandise he could make off the new game instead of making cuter versions of the made base animatronics. You also get the puppet and or marionette and of course Mangle, which are very interesting designs to say the least, and of course Balloon Boy.
Hi.
Who are these new animatronics? How did they play into the story of what had happened at this haunted pizzeria chain run by a mass murderer? And what pizzeria chain are we even at in Five Nights at Freddy's 2? It's not the same as it was in the first game, and we're also not the same security guard. What's going on? This is a formula that Scott Cawthon would basically adapt into every Five Nights at Freddy's game going forward. Every new release would basically have new characters, new location, a new playable character even, and a new story. I would say the first 4 quote-unquote mainline Five Nights at Freddy's games were the ones that people definitely played the most online. Every single time these games would come out, every Let's Player, their grandma, their dog, their accountant, and their plumber would basically upload a new video on them because they knew it was easy money and easy clicks. The Five Nights at Freddy's fan base was completely ravenous even at this point, but it was a lot more of early internet culture where, you know, everything was kind of just communicated from, you know, really obscure memes and in-jokes that you could really only understand if you were in the community. I know a lot of people are going to say the FNAF community is like that today, but you gotta understand. There was no know your meme or behind the meme back in the day for people who just didn't get it and need to have a joke explained to them. FNAF fans were also, and I think still kind of to this day, very tribalistic. Even though half of the Five Nights at Freddy's fan base, even to this day, has never played a Five Nights at Freddy's game and has only gotten information on the franchise through lore videos and watching other people play them, they will defend these games to the fucking death. Even if these games are very easily criticizable for their insanely simplistic mechanics and many bugs and glitches and honestly just very AI and RNG dependent gameplay, they don't care. They love these games. They love this weird, wacky world with its serial killer, haunted, and robot people. I think a big reason why this fan base really took off as it did, it came out, like I said, in the perfect time. The early 2010s were great for weird horror-esque franchises that had cute and likable characters. Also, I'm just gonna say it now, furry culture was definitely growing in the early online 2010s, and I mean, while they're robots, they still are based off of animals, so it's not really a surprise at all to see the Five Nights at Freddy's exploded with the furry community in the online 2010s. Y'all remember a show called My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic? Well, even if you do or you don't, you probably are at least aware of what a brony is. And look, when I was like 12 or 13 years old, I remember watching episodes of this show, and I thought it was pretty cool, alright? Don't judge me. I remember specifically in the huge online brony community, which I'm not even gonna front, it was a lot of degenerate people, how tons of them, and I mean tons of them, shifted over to the FNAF community permanently when those games were starting to blow up. FNAF kind of seemed to be like an umbrella fandom. If you were into very predominantly like internet meme joke-based fan bases around this time with some sort of weird horror-esque elements to them, usually in media that was meant for children, or at least young teenagers, Five Nights at Freddy's kind of seemed to have all of these fandoms intertwined with them. It was just so popular and everyone knew about it. I know for some of my older, long-time Big Citrus viewers who are gonna say, well, yeah, but did these games make Scott Cawthon any money at the time? Yes, they did. Even from the early mainline Five Nights at Freddy's games before he started making tons of spin-offs and tons of merch, just completely going the way of a quote-unquote corporate sellout, he was making bank off this franchise. To this day, I see tons of Five Nights at Freddy's fans who will buy every single piece of cute merch they find now. Also, you know, there's the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, which we'll talk about later. I also know that there are still some people who are watching this video who say to themselves, what the fuck is Five Nights at Freddy's? Like, why is this shit so popular? Like, why are you even making a video on the Citrus? I know a lot of people who only know minor things about the FNAF lore or have no idea what the hell it is about are probably so confused about how the concept of these games and what they're about like became so popular with so many people. Hell, you might even have to theorize about how it became so popular. You know, I'll stop making jokes about it. Let's just talk about MatPat.
Thanks for having us, guys. We gotta go before one of us gets kidnapped and or pregnant.
Now, some people might have scrolled through some of the timestamps on this video and are like, why the fuck does MatPat from Game Theory get his own section? I will tell you why. Look at the view count on these videos. There's like a playlist on YouTube that has like 100 videos, some of which are live streams, but for the most part are full in-length game theory videos of the man just going bananas. He is analyzing minimum wage, real murder cases in real life parallel to the games, the physics of like animatronic robots. He was going fucking crazy. If you do not know who Matthew Patrick is, aka founder of Game Theory, Film Theory, and God, he made a lot of these theory channels. He was a YouTuber who started in the very early 10s with a simple YouTube series called Game Theory. It sounds exactly like what it sounds like. He would make theories about video games. He would try to prove them with science and things like that and go really in-depth aspects of video games that people really didn't think about and theorize as to what is true and what isn't true. I like to think in some sort of alternative timeline, MatPat made tons of videos on the Call of Duty Zombies storyline instead of Five Nights at Freddy's, and that became the huge cult-wide phenomenon with like the obscure fan base with the insanely complicated plot that no one could understand and the multiple versions of the same characters doing different things at different timelines. I definitely understand that FNAF is significantly more marketable. You may remember a horror franchise that blew up after FNAF became popular called Hello Neighbor. Entire videos have been made on the downfall of this franchise, which is sad because it really had a lot of potential at first with the interesting concept of trying to break into your new neighbor's house, who had a very intelligent AI, might I add, and discovering the weird and wacky things he had inside and trying to figure out what he was hiding. MatPat made a few videos on Hello Neighbor and everything, and I remember I hadn't even heard of the game until specifically he made a video on it. The game started to get worse as more and more updates came out for it, and it got to the point where the developers behind the Hello Neighbor games themselves like literally were begging MatPat to make more videos on the game because it was one of the only reasons that people knew about it. The developer of FNAF, Scott Cawthon, never had that level of desperation to beg for people to make theories and videos about these games because he didn't need to. He had these motherfuckers eating out of the palm of his hand. MatPat started with a video on Five Nights at Freddy's on October 23rd of 2014, very shortly after the first game came out, and that video did really well. The next video did really well. The next video did really, I mean, he was raking it in, guys, if that's what you want to hear. It's crazy to see that he was pulling these numbers with overly long, complicated theory videos about an indie horror game based off of children's animatronic entertainment. But yeah, the Five Nights at Freddy's storyline was just that complicated that we needed to have Senior Matthew Patrick explain it to us. His videos, along with other Let's Players videos, were some of the main reasons that this franchise blew up as far as it did. The stories and characters would change with every new FNAF release, and every time they did, MatPat was trying to say that he had finally solved the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline. Scott Cawthon and the online content creators of Five Nights at Freddy's really do owe a lot to each other because they made some serious coin off this whack shit franchise. There's a couple of other online content creators that we definitely need to mention. First of all, one of them being JT Music, who was one of those YouTube online song video game makers. I mean, there's been so many of them, and a lot of them are really great and put so much effort into making their quirky original songs for these quirky original games. JT Music made a bunch of FNAF songs and specifically had the Join Us for a Bite, Can't Wait to Meet You FNAF song, which, you know, that's a lot of views, holy shit. And of course, we can't forget I could make an entire video on the Living Tombstone and his contribution to a lot of online media. Bro is basically the Beethoven of quirky internet fandom video game music. Even myself, as a person who makes their own original music, check out Big Citrus on Spotify now. And someone who considers themselves a bit of a music snob and wouldn't associate themselves with this level of cringe. I gotta keep it real. Living Tombstone, kind of the GOAT. Put some respect on his name. We haven't really gotten to the point of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise completely having taken over the internet at this point. At around the release of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, it was still incredibly popular, but I wouldn't say that it was kind of like a household name, just something that everyone knew about on the internet. I mean this in the nicest way, and I think anyone who's a huge fan of Five Nights at Freddy's will absolutely agree with this, but for the most part, this franchise was just loved by weirdos. A lot of the people who are Five Nights at Freddy's fans even to this day will admit to you that there are a lot of people who are gooning, degenerate, creepy, smelly, crusty individuals. I could literally just like sit here and upload like 85 FNAF cringe compilations, but I'm not gonna do that because I think everyone already knows that this community can get pretty cringe at times. But I don't really think that started until after the release of a specific game called Five Nights at Freddy's Sister Location. So, I believe it goes like this. The original plan was after Five Nights at Freddy's 4 that the mainline series games were basically done, but then in 2016, Scott Cawthon probably decided that he wanted to go buy another mansion and decided, you know what? let's just go hog wild. With the release of Five Nights at Freddy's sister location, I really think this is where the franchise kind of became a bit flanderized, and the people who were used to be fans of it started to care less about it because the storyline just kept reinventing itself in kind of the worst way, and people didn't really care about the storyline as much, and also the new game was just still somehow similar to the original Five Nights at Freddy's released in 2014. Also, I imagine longtime fans were like, okay, we're still pumping out new FNAF games like every 6 months, alright. Don't get me wrong, people still made videos on these games as they came out, made songs for them, played them on YouTube, but I got the feeling that a lot of diehard FNAF fans at this point were just starting to get tired. The game had become kind of overblown by this point, like, just up to the point of Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. There's so many characters in this franchise up to this point. How many more iterations of Frederick Fazbearrington are you going to make, Scott Marie Cawthon? And you could tell at this point, especially at the time sister location had released, which I guess is technically Five Nights at Freddy's 5, Scott really tried leaning in to the whole lore aspect. There were so many Easter eggs in the games at this point that kind of could tell you more about the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise and the real quote-unquote story. It didn't tell you everything though, so people like Matt Pat and others could keep making their theories on the whole FNAF storyline. Scott knew how to play the system. He's a genius. The sister location felt like a huge shark jump for the franchise because it introduced so many new characters and elements that were just never present before. I remember there was a lot of outrage at the time. People thought Five Nights at Freddy's kind of peaked with Five Nights at Freddy's 3 with Springtrap and everything and the story behind the spring lock failure, and honestly I kind of agree, that's the most iconic story in the franchise to me. He introduced so many iconic characters, especially the story of William Afton's daughter. It's just so crazy to me how out of pocket it got. Now, it was around this time that I think Scott realized that he could really market this franchise to children and younger audiences. It didn't start until Five Nights at Freddy's 2, obviously, but he really hammed up the more childlike design animatronic, which makes sense and everything. You know, these animatronics are like designed to appeal to children and everything, but I really feel like he started to hammer it out, especially in Sister Location, because it was around this time as well, after the release of Sister Location and the Five Nights at Freddy's spin-offs would come out in the years after, that this franchise became directly marketed towards children. A lot of people see Five Nights at Freddy's Sister Location as basically the last real legitimate Five Nights at Freddy's release, which is insane to think that that was 7 years ago. Yes, there were tons of spin-offs released since then, and hell, a game like FNAF World that came out the same year as Sister Location doesn't even have any scares in it. It's literally just like an indie RPG where you get to play as the FNAF animatronics, like all of them. The only FNAF game that's come out since then that's generated any sort of level of hype in terms of the actual fandom for like the real video games and playing them was Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach in 2021. Which, to be fair, it was a new take on the franchise, featuring a more open environment, you know, 3D POV style of play, but it was still very Five Nights at Freddy's. It was also very buggy and glitchy. These games still made money and everything, but Let's Players weren't really playing them as much anymore, and therefore a lot of people weren't really playing them as much anymore because that was a lot of people's only exposure to the actual Five Nights at Freddy's games themselves. However, there was not really any game franchise that had the level of insanity in terms of a storyline and characters that Five Nights at Freddy's had, and therefore people ran wild with it. Not only did Scott realize he could market this franchise to children, other people online realized they could market this franchise to children. There's like a million like kids YouTubers, like kind of like bordering on like Elsa Gate style content it's specifically Five Nights at Freddy's based content. And yeah, there's some stuff that, you know, they try to scare kids and everything, but for the most part it's usually just the characters and the animatronics goofing off and everything. For the last 7 years, I honestly think the FNAF franchise has kind of lived in limbo as a huge fucking joke. And by joke, I more so mean a complicated internet meme that everyone kind of knows about and loves and kind of hates. People make fun of Five Nights at Freddy's religiously on the internet, but they still know about it and they're still talking about it, so it's helping keep the franchise alive. There's always jokes about like the Five Nights at Freddy's lore and solving it, but I think the reason that it's become such a popular online meme is because at least 90% of us have watched one video on the Five Nights at Freddy's lore, talked about it with a friend, trying to solve this time-traveling robot murder mystery. And then there are people who just genuinely love the game, making fan art, animations, cosplays, slightly worse and more obscene fan art, and of course fan fiction. Now I know a lot of people are gonna say, fan art, fan fiction, and this cosplay, isn't this shit all cringe? Isn't it only liked by stupid stinky weirdos who aren't really anyone? You gotta understand, that is a large majority of people on the internet. The amount of people that I have seen who I never expected were secretly Five Nights at Freddy's fans has kind of been shocking. Now in 2023, Five Nights at Freddy's is kind of just a beloved staple icon of the internet. It's gotten to the point where memes that are specifically made in the FNAF community just like blow up and everyone knows about them. Like I was saying though, with the release of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie made by Blumhouse and everything with actual real movie stars in it like Matthew Lillard and Josh Hutcherson. And oh look, there's Matt Pat. The Living Tombstone in the credits. So many people are going to see this movie and it's making a huge, insanely large profit off of a relatively small budget, which is, you know, very Five Nights at Freddy's indeed. And apparently the Five Nights at Freddy's 2 movie has already entered pre-production. And Scott Cawthon has barely made any new Five Nights at Freddy's video games within the last 7 years. He's just let it all be handled by the community and people who wanted to make a Five Nights at Freddy's movie, including the studio that proposed this idea to him. And these people have taken this franchise and kind of made it their own. The movie is really the thing that I think sends this franchise into the stratosphere of gaming. Even if the games aren't necessarily beloved by everyone and respected, everyone still knows about them and knows about this franchise now, and the intricacies of its fan base and its story. And it's just odd to see where this all started. People alone in their rooms had an idea and wanted to entertain people, and they spawned a franchise with a ridiculous name, even more ridiculous concept, and it somehow became bigger than these huge AAA franchises that companies have been trying to shove down everyone's throats for the past 10 years. Yeah, is its fan base insane? Yeah, does the story make no sense and is mostly just designed to keep people guessing rather than telling a complete beginning, middle, and end? Yes, are the games not necessarily designed very well? And the gameplay of all of them can be summed to check camera, look outside of door, repeat. Yeah, that's all true. But bro, it's Five Nights at Freddy's. It's freaking epic, dude. I'm sorry, I didn't know how to end this off. The reason that this franchise became so popular is because there's really nothing else like it, and over the course of years, people held on to their love of this franchise and the love of the people involved with it. I would say it never really exploded until the announcement of the movie in like earlier this year. The way that I've just been seeing Five Nights at Freddy's pop up on my Twitter, just random things just sent in my own community Discord. No matter what I did, as someone who was never a huge fan of Five Nights at Freddy's, I really just didn't understand it. And then I looked around and I kind of understood why people have glommed onto this franchise so much. It's kind of infectious in a way. People don't really care about quality when it comes to Five Nights at Freddy's. They just care that it is undefinitively, unapologetically Five Nights at Freddy's. FNAF. Even if over the course of the next few years somehow that this franchise starts to become less popular and starts to kind of fade out, it'll always come back. If you enjoy this video and want to leave me your own thoughts about the FNAF franchise or maybe another franchise I should cover, leave me comments. Everyone who watches these videos knows that I'm always liking and hearting the comments and genuinely reading and reacting to them. Thank you guys for watching. I'm kind of taking a bit of a weird experimental route with this video. Check out everything in the description. I'm gonna go have a little nap. I've been Big Citrus. And have a damn good one.